In 1961, a woman sat in a Jerusalem courtroom watching the trial of one of the architects of the Holocaust. She expected to see a monster, a demon with cold, calculating eyes, a creature of pure malevolence who would finally reveal what true evil looks like. What she saw instead was far more terrifying. Adolf Eichmann was boring. He was a bureaucrat, a paper pusher, a man who spoke in cliches and couldn't form an original thought. He wasn't driven by hatred of Jews. He wasn't a psychopath. He was a man who wanted to advance his career, who followed orders, who did his job efficiently, who never stopped to think about what that job actually meant. This man, this nobody, this empty shell of a human being, had helped organize the murder of 6 million people. Hannah Arendt looked at him and understood something that should keep all of us awake at night. Evil doesn't require monsters. It doesn't require demons or psychopaths or sadists. It only requires ordinary people who stop thinking, people who follow rules without questioning, people who do their jobs without considering the consequences, people who go along with the system because going along is easier than standing apart. She called it the banality of evil, and it might be the most important concept for understanding the horrors of the 20th century and the horrors that are still possible in the 21st. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. If evil doesn't require monsters, if it only requires thoughtlessness, then evil is not safely outside us. It's a possibility within every single one of us, including you, including me. For the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you what Hannah Arendt discovered about the nature of evil, and I'm going to ask you to consider the most uncomfortable question imaginable. Under the right circumstances, could you become part of something evil without even realizing it? Stay with me. This could change how you see yourself and the world. Before we continue, I need you to answer something honestly. Have you ever followed an order you knew was wrong because it was easier than resisting? Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Have you ever gone along with something because everyone else was going along? Leave a comment, because if you're honest, you've touched something Arendt understood, that the line between good people and participants in evil is much thinner than we want to believe. Hannah Arendt was born in 1906 in Hanover, Germany, into an educated, secular Jewish family. She was brilliant from childhood, studying philosophy at the best universities in Germany, learning from the greatest minds of her generation, including Martin Heidegger, with whom she had a complicated romantic relationship that would haunt her reputation forever. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, Arendt saw clearly what was coming. She was arrested by the Gestapo that same year for collecting evidence of Nazi anti-Semitism. She managed to escape, fled to France, was interned in a camp when Germany invaded, escaped again, and finally made it to America in 1941. She lost her country. She lost her language. She lost friends and family members to the Holocaust. She became what she would later call stateless, a person without a nation, without the protection that citizenship provides. But she never lost her capacity to think. And thinking, she would argue, is the only thing that can protect us from evil. After the war, Arendt became one of the most important political thinkers in America. She wrote about totalitarianism, about revolution, about the nature of power and freedom. But nothing she wrote caused more controversy than her report on the Eichmann trial, published first as articles in The New Yorker, and then as a book. Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. The phrase banality of evil exploded like a bomb. People were outraged. How dare she call the Holocaust banal? How dare she suggest that its architects were ordinary? Wasn't she minimizing the horror? Wasn't she excusing the perpetrators? But Arendt was doing the opposite. She was making the horror worse. Because if Eichmann had been a monster, we could comfort ourselves that monsters are rare. We could tell ourselves that we would never be like that we are fundamentally different from such creatures. Arendt removed that comfort. She showed us that the man who organized the transport of millions to their deaths was someone who could have been our neighbor, our colleague, our friend, someone ordinary, someone who simply stopped thinking. Let me explain what Arendt meant by the banality of evil, because it's widely misunderstood. She was not saying that the Holocaust was banal. The Holocaust was among the most horrific events in human history. 6 million Jews murdered, along with millions of others. Roma, disabled people, homosexuals, political prisoners, gas chambers, mass shootings, medical experiments, industrialized death on a scale never before seen. What Arendt was saying is that the perpetrators were often banal. They weren't exceptional. They weren't driven by exceptional hatred or exceptional cruelty or exceptional anything. They were disturbingly normal. Eichmann, she observed, was not stupid, but he was thoughtless. He couldn't speak without clichés. He couldn't consider any perspective other than his own career advancement. When asked about the morality of what he did, he retreated into phrases like, "I was just following orders," and "I was doing my duty." He seemed genuinely incapable of thinking from the perspective of his victims. This thoughtlessness, Arendt argued, was the key. Not hatred, not malice. Just the complete absence of genuine thinking. Think about what this means. We like to believe that evil requires evil intentions, that people who do terrible things must have terrible motives, that if we can just identify the monsters, we can prevent the horror. But Eichmann didn't have monstrous motives. He wanted to advance his career. He wanted to be seen as efficient. He wanted to belong. He wanted to do his job well. These are motives that most of us share. The system he served was monstrous. The outcomes he produced were monstrous. But the man himself was terrifyingly ordinary. This means that identifying evil people isn't enough to prevent evil, because evil doesn't require evil people. It requires systems that allow ordinary people to do evil things without thinking about what they're doing. Let me ask you directly, how often do you really think about the consequences of your actions? Not the immediate consequences to yourself, but the full consequences to everyone affected. How often do you consider whether the systems you participate in, your job, your purchases, your taxes, your votes, might be causing harm you don't see? Arendt would say that most of us, most of the time, don't think about these things. We do our jobs. We follow the rules. We trust the system. We assume someone else is handling the ethics. This is exactly how ordinary people become complicit in extraordinary evil. If this is making you uncomfortable, good. It should. And I need you to do something now. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for algorithm vanity, but because Arendt's warning about thoughtlessness needs to reach more people. And what comes next is where her ideas become even more disturbing and more relevant. Arendt identified several factors that made the Holocaust possible, and they're all factors that exist today. First, the administrative mindset. Eichmann didn't think of himself as a murderer. He was a logistics expert. His job was transportation. He arranged trains, schedules, paperwork. The fact that the cargo was human beings being transported to death camps was, in his mind, someone else's department. This compartmentalization allowed him to do his job without confronting its meaning. He could focus on efficiency, on meeting quotas, on solving logistical problems, all without ever having to say, "I am helping to murder millions of people." How many systems today operate on the same principle? How many people contribute to harmful outcomes by doing their small part of a larger machine, never seeing the whole picture, never confronting the final results? Second, the normalization of evil. When Eichmann joined the Nazi Party, the Holocaust hadn't happened yet. It developed gradually. First, discrimination, then exclusion from professions, then forced relocation, then concentration, then extermination. Each step seemed like a small increment from the last. At each stage, people adapted. What was unthinkable yesterday became normal today. What was normal today became the baseline for what was possible tomorrow. The escalation happened so gradually that many people didn't notice they had crossed into the unthinkable. How many things have become normal in your lifetime that would have been unthinkable to previous generations? How would you recognize if you were in the middle of a gradual normalization of something terrible? Third, the destruction of plurality. Totalitarian systems, Arendt observed, destroy the space between people where genuine thinking can occur. They isolate individuals, break down communities, make everyone afraid to speak honestly with anyone else. When you can't talk openly with others, you can't think clearly yourself. Thinking, for Arendt, was not a solitary activity. It required plurality, different perspectives, honest dialogue. Totalitarianism destroys all of that, leaving people alone with propaganda. Second question for you. Think about your sources of information. Think about the communities you belong to. Are you exposed to genuinely different perspectives? Do you have people in your life who challenge your assumptions? Or have you surrounded yourself with agreement, with echo chambers, with people who think exactly like you? Because the ability to think requires the ability to encounter different viewpoints, and echo chambers, whatever their political direction, are training grounds for thoughtlessness. Arendt's analysis of evil has been tested in psychological experiments, and the results are disturbing. The Milgram experiments in the 1960s showed that ordinary people would administer what they believed were painful and potentially lethal electric shocks to strangers, simply because an authority figure told them to. 2/3 of participants went all the way to the maximum voltage. They were uncomfortable. Some protested, but they kept pressing the button. The Stanford prison experiment showed how quickly ordinary college students could become cruel guards and passive prisoners when given roles in a simulated prison. The experiment had to be stopped early because the guards had become genuinely abusive. These experiments confirmed Arendt's insight. Evil doesn't require evil people. It requires situations that suppress thinking, that establish authority, that define roles, that normalize cruelty through gradual escalation. We all want to believe we would resist. We all want to believe we would be the exception. But the experiments show that most of us wouldn't be. Most of us would go along. Most of us would follow orders. Most of us would become, in Arendt's terms, thoughtless. This is not cause for despair. It's cause for vigilance. Because Arendt didn't just diagnose the problem. She pointed toward solutions. The primary solution is thinking. Not intelligence, not education, not expertise. Thinking. The active, ongoing process of examining your beliefs, questioning your assumptions, considering different perspectives, asking yourself whether what you're doing is right. Thinking is not automatic. It requires effort. It requires solitude. It requires the willingness to be uncomfortable. And it can be cultivated or destroyed, depending on how we structure our lives and our societies. Arendt believed that thinking is something anyone can do. You don't need a philosophy degree. You don't need special training. You just need to stop periodically and ask, what am I actually doing? What are the consequences? Is this right? Eichmann never asked these questions. He never stopped to think. He just kept doing his job. Arendt also emphasized the importance of judgment. In situations where the normal rules have failed, where the system itself has become evil, you cannot rely on rules to tell you what is right. You must judge for yourself. This is terrifying because it means you can't escape responsibility by following orders or obeying laws. If the orders are evil, following them is still evil. If the laws are unjust, obeying them is still unjust. You don't get to hide behind the system. At the Nuremberg trials, I was just following orders was rejected as a defense. The perpetrators were held responsible for what they did, regardless of who commanded them. This established a crucial principle. You are morally responsible for your actions even when authority tells you to act. But how many of us actually live this way? How many of us are prepared to disobey unjust orders, to resist evil systems, to exercise our own judgment when everything around us says to comply? Third question, and this is the hardest. If you were living in Nazi Germany in 1940, do you honestly believe you would have been among the resistors? Not the passive majority who went along, not the active perpetrators, the actual resistors who risked their lives to help the persecuted. Be honest. Because most people didn't resist. The resistors were extraordinary, and if we're honest, most of us would probably have been in the majority who went along, who kept our heads down, who told ourselves we were just ordinary people who couldn't make a difference. This honesty is not comfortable, but it's necessary, because only by recognizing our own capacity for complicity can we guard against it. Let me tell you about someone who did resist. Someone who demonstrates what Arendt's principles look like in practice. During the Holocaust, there were individuals who refused to go along, people who hid Jews in their homes, people who forged documents, people who smuggled children to safety. They came from all backgrounds, religious and secular, educated and uneducated, rich and poor. What did they have in common? Researchers who have studied rescuers found several things. They had a strong sense of personal responsibility. They didn't wait for someone else to act. They saw a person in need and responded as if they were personally obligated to help. They also had empathy across group lines. They could see Jews as human beings, as individuals, not as a faceless category. When the propaganda dehumanized, they rehumanized, and they had often been raised to think for themselves. Their families had encouraged questioning, independence, moral reasoning. They weren't simply obedient children grown into obedient adults. These qualities can be cultivated. We can raise children who think for themselves. We can build communities that encourage questioning. We can practice empathy that crosses group lines. We can develop the habit of personal responsibility. Resistance to evil is not a genetic trait. It's a capacity that can be developed. but it must be developed before the crisis comes, because in the crisis there's no time. Arendt also wrote extensively about the importance of the public realm, the space where citizens come together to discuss, debate, and act collectively. Totalitarianism destroys this space. It isolates individuals, makes them afraid to speak, reduces them to atoms who can be controlled. Democracy, in contrast, requires the public realm. It requires citizens who engage, who discuss, who take responsibility for their shared world. When citizens retreat into private life, when they focus only on their personal concerns and leave politics to others, they create a vacuum that can be filled by tyranny. This is not about any particular political position. It's about participation itself, about showing up, about paying attention, about taking the public world seriously. Arendt would look at declining civic participation, at increasing political apathy, at people who say, "I'm not interested in politics," and she would see danger. Not because of any particular policy outcome, but because democracy without engaged citizens becomes something else. Before we conclude, I want to address something about Arendt that troubled many of her critics. She was hard on the Jewish leadership during the Holocaust, criticizing Jewish councils that cooperated with the Nazis in organizing deportations. This was controversial, and many found it hurtful, blaming victims in a situation of impossible choices. But Arendt's point, however painfully made, was consistent with her larger argument, that in extreme situations, traditional morality breaks down, and each person must exercise their own judgment. The Jewish leaders who cooperated thought they were minimizing harm. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they weren't. The point is that even in impossible situations, choice exists. Judgment must be exercised. Responsibility cannot be escaped. This is a harsh doctrine. It doesn't allow for the comfort of saying, "I had no choice," because Arendt believed there is always a choice, even if all the options are terrible. So what do we do with all this? How do Arendt's insights help us navigate our own world? First, commit to thinking. Regularly examine what you believe and why you believe it. Question the systems you participate in. Ask yourself whether your actions align with your values. Don't let thoughtlessness become your default. Second, resist compartmentalization. See the whole picture. If your job contributes to something harmful, don't hide behind, "That's not my department." You are responsible for what you contribute to, even indirectly. Third, guard against normalization. Pay attention when boundaries shift. Ask whether things that seem normal now would have seemed acceptable to you before. Don't let gradual escalation numb you to what's actually happening. Fourth, cultivate plurality. Expose yourself to different perspectives. Have friends who disagree with you. Don't retreat into echo chambers where your assumptions are never challenged. Fifth, practice judgment. Don't rely on rules alone to tell you what's right. In situations where the rules themselves might be wrong, you must be prepared to judge for yourself and act accordingly. Sixth, participate. Don't retreat from public life. Citizenship is not a spectator sport. The public realm needs your presence, your voice, your engagement. Seventh, develop empathy across lines. See individuals, not categories. Resist the dehumanization that makes evil possible. When propaganda tells you a group is less than human, remind yourself of their humanity. Before you go, I need you to do something. If Arendt's warning about the banality of evil has affected you, share this video. Someone needs to hear this. Someone is sleepwalking through life without questioning the systems they serve. Someone needs to be reminded that thoughtlessness is not innocence, and that we are all responsible for what we participate in. And subscribe to this channel. We're exploring the ideas that can help us become more vigilant, more thoughtful, more resistant to the subtle seductions of evil. Hannah Arendt died in 1975, working at her typewriter, in the middle of a book about thinking. Her last words on paper were about the life of the mind, about the faculty that she believed was our only protection against evil. She had seen the worst of the 20th century. She had lost her country, her language, many of her people. She had stared into the face of radical evil and been terrified not by its demonic quality, but by its banality. And she spent her life warning us that evil doesn't require monsters, warning us that ordinary people can do extraordinary harm, warning us that thoughtlessness is not innocence, warning us that we are all responsible for what we failed to prevent. The Holocaust is history, but the conditions that made it possible are not historical. Bureaucracies that compartmentalize responsibility, propaganda that dehumanizes, normalization that shifts boundaries. echo chambers that suppress thinking, apathy that abandons the public realm. These conditions exist now. They exist everywhere. They are the soil in which the banality of evil can grow. The question is whether we will tend the garden, whether we will cultivate thinking, whether we will exercise judgment, whether we will participate in the public world, whether we will maintain our capacity for genuine moral response. Arendt gave us the diagnosis. The treatment is up to us. In the end, the most haunting thing about Adolf Eichmann was not what he did. It was what he didn't do. He didn't think. He didn't question. He didn't imagine himself in his victim's place. He didn't exercise his own judgment. He just followed orders. He just did his job. He just went along. And 6 million people died. The banality of evil is a warning. Not about monsters out there, about the potential within each of us to stop thinking, to follow along, to participate in systems without questioning them. The protection against evil is not purity or virtue. It's vigilance. It's the ongoing commitment to think, to question, to judge, to resist thoughtlessness in all its forms. This is not easy. It's not comfortable. It's not a one-time achievement, but a lifetime practice. But it's the only thing that stands between us and the banality of evil. Arendt taught us that. The question is whether we'll learn.